What had me questioning the marriage as a so-called holy institution and investigate the origin of family law was the various forms of deceit practiced by marriage partners to lure someone into marrying them, from the restraint on sex before marriage, pregnancies, suicidal threats, and claiming that God has sent someone, up to my personal experience from my divorce and custody applications, having to deal with the deceit and exploitation by family law and church officials, during which my businesses were sabotaged and my children were severely traumatized. The South African family law, which claims to be fundamentally based on the Christian belief of a God-instructed marriage, derives from ancient times where the worst form of human right violation against women was committed, where an unlimited amount of underage girls could be traded for camels to men often 3 times their age. According to the Roman Dutch law, this practice continued until the church's involvement in 1545, where a priest, 2 witnesses, and the reading of vows were required, followed by the court's involvement in 1670, where a magistrate could conclude a marriage without the requirement of vows, which are still being practiced today. It is clear that the wrongs with our marital system is not only due to the naive and the innocent being driven by the suppression of their reproductive hormones, but for being lured into a state-controlled marriage under the false hypothesis of a blind trust in a deity to bind them together forever, from which until recently they could not escape for the belief that the deity forbids divorce. These wrongs worsened in many cases since the legalization of divorce due to the exploitation by sadistic and narcissistic family law practitioners, turning what has started as a love story between 2 lovers into a crime story by destroying family structures and businesses. And parties who would attempt to escape from the imprisonment of an abusive and destructive marriage would often sustain irreparable damage from being buried under feelings of guilt, anger and fear caused by exploiting family law practitioners through the drawn-out and deceitful divorce procedures. Another disturbing aspect of the state-controlled marriage is the discriminating and biased legislation that child custody resides with the mother after divorce. This leaves the father, who needs to protect his children against an abusive mother, with no other option than to be drawn into the deceitful procedures of a custody application. Due to the deceitful nature of corrupt family law officials, it is often witnessed that a father who would be granted with a temporary custody order by a High Court judge would be overthrown by the fraudulent report by a social worker who is on the payroll of the Department of Justice and occupying a rent-free office at an NG church, with that particular NG church not taking any accountability for the deceitful actions performed by the social worker. For fathers who are currently facing similar ordeals and who are living with the hope of restoring their relationship with their children one day, need to be aware of the emotional damage done to their children due to the breaking of trust and the lack of feeling to belong by their child. The second form of deceit I've encountered is that which derives from the Prescription Act. The Act, which seems to mainly serve the deceiving party, is supported by deceitful law practitioners who would attempt to create confusion by disputing from the legitimacy of a claim, the inception date of the statutory claim period in the event of fraud, the seeking of proof that fraud was unlawful and intentional, to claiming that fraud committed by system officials also prescribes, after them having performed even more fraudulent actions to prevent the prosecution of the corrupt officials during the statutory claim period. And in the event of fraud being reported, one of the following scenarios would occur. The South African Police Services would either refuse to open a docket, the docket would mysteriously disappear, or a magistrate would just declare the claim null and void. In the event of a case being heard by the court, and the perpetrator be found guilty of fraud after a prolonged period of time, the perpetrator is not liable to make any payment. The third form of deceit I've encountered is that which derives from the collusion by corrupt officials to orchestrate legal witch hunts in their efforts to sabotage their victims' financial and social support network, during which all forms of malpractices would take place. From replacing law practitioners to replacing law firms after being reported to their governing bodies, and from interfering with business partners and family members to the sabotage of electricity and water supply, leading to their victims' inability to honor their financial commitments towards their home loan, legal repayments, and other creditors, after which the corrupt officials will collude with financial institutions and creditors. This brings me to the so-called lawyer's oath, on which the only thing I will say regarding the majority of lawyers I've dealt with is that their oath is not worth the paper it is written on. And probably the most disturbing factor I've encountered is the magnitude of corrupt officials who have positioned in governing bodies with a purpose to protect malpracticing officials. In part 5 of my 10 video series under Interveners, I give a brief description of the mediation services we provide regarding family, motor vehicle, sectional title, and faulty electricity and water metering. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to your engagement in our crusade.